Gauri Viswanathan's book, The Beginnings of English Literary Study in British India, is a significant contribution to the field of post-colonial studies and the history of education in India. The book focuses on the establishment of English literary education in India during the colonial period and explores the ideological and cultural implications of this development. Here is an overview of the main themes and arguments presented in the book. Colonial education and English literary study. Viswanathan examines how English literary education was introduced in India as part of the colonial project. She explores the motivations behind the colonial administration's promotion of English literature and the English language as a means of civilizing and controlling the Indian population. The book delves into the historical context of British India and the political, social, and cultural dynamics that shaped the educational policies of the time. Cultural hegemony and Orientalism. Viswanathan analyzes the role of English literary study in perpetuating cultural hegemony and reinforcing the Orientalist framework. She argues that the study of English literature in India was often used to propagate British values, ideals, and norms, while simultaneously marginalizing and devaluing indigenous literary traditions and cultural expressions. Appropriation and resistance. The book explores how Indian scholars and intellectuals engaged with English literature and the ways in which they appropriated and resisted colonial educational practices. Viswanathan examines the works and writings of Indian scholars such as Krishna Mohan Banerjee, Ramesh Chandra Banerjee, and others who negotiated the colonial educational system and sought to assert the value of Indian literary and cultural traditions. Language and identity. Viswanathan discusses how the study of English literature in India intersected with issues of language and identity. She highlights the complex relationship between English and Indian languages, and the debates surrounding the choice of language for education and cultural expression. The book explores how English literary study shaped notions of linguistic identity and influenced the emergence of a bilingual and bicultural intelligentsia in India. Legacy and impact. Viswanathan examines the lasting impact of the colonial educational system and English literary study on Indian society and culture. She reflects on how the study of English literature became deeply embedded in the educational institutions and curriculum of independent India, even after the end of colonial rule. The book raises critical questions about the influence of colonial legacies on contemporary educational practices and the ongoing negotiation of cultural identities in post-colonial India. The Beginnings of English Literary Study in British India offers a comprehensive exploration of the historical and ideological dimensions of English literary education in colonial India. It critically examines the power dynamics, cultural encounters, and debates surrounding the study of English literature, shedding light on the complexities of colonial education and its long-lasting effects on Indian society and culture. English literature is a tool of cultural domination. Viswanathan argues that the study of English literature in British India served as a tool of cultural domination and social control. The British colonial administration promoted English literature as superior to Indian literature, positioning it as a symbol of Western civilization and intellectual superiority. This created a hierarchy of literary traditions, with English literature being privileged and Indian literature marginalized. An example of this can be seen in the emphasis placed on English literary texts in educational institutions, while Indian literary works were largely excluded from the curriculum. Resistance through vernacular literature. Despite the dominance of English literature, Viswanathan highlights instances of resistance and subversion by Indian scholars and intellectuals who sought to assert the value of vernacular literature. They advocated for the inclusion of Indian literary works written in languages such as Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, and Urdu in the curriculum alongside English literature. For example, the Indian poet and scholar Rabindranath Tagore promoted the study of Bengali literature and incorporated it into his educational institution, Visva Bharati University. Colonial pedagogical practices. The book examines the pedagogical practices employed in the teaching of English literature in British India. Viswanathan argues that these practices often reinforced colonial power dynamics and imposed a Western-centric perspective. For instance, Indian students were encouraged to internalize Western literary theories, aesthetics, and critical frameworks, which further reinforced the cultural hegemony of the colonizers. This perpetuated the notion that English literature was the only legitimate form of literary study. Indian adaptations and transformations of English literary study. Viswanathan explores how Indian scholars and intellectuals adapted and transformed English literary study to suit local contexts. They incorporated indigenous cultural elements and approaches into the study of English literature, creating a distinct form of literary analysis and interpretation. An example is the work of scholars like A.K. Ramanujan and Raja Rao, who drew on Indian literary traditions, oral storytelling, and mythology to enrich their engagement with English literature. Impact on nationalism and anti-colonial movements. The study of English literature had significant implications for nationalist and anti-colonial movements in India. It provided a platform for Indian intellectuals to critique and challenge colonial ideologies and articulate their vision for social and political change. Writers like Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and Sarojini Naidu used their knowledge of English literature to convey nationalist sentiments and advocate for Indian independence. These examples further illustrate the complex dynamics surrounding the study of English literature in colonial India. They highlight the power imbalances, cultural negotiations, and resistance strategies that emerged within the educational system, showcasing the interplay between colonial dominance and indigenous agency. Canon formation and exclusion. Viswanathan examines how the study of English literature in British India contributed to the formation of a literary canon that excluded indigenous Indian literary works. The curriculum primarily focused on British and Western authors, neglecting the rich literary traditions of India. For example, works by authors like William Shakespeare, John Milton, and Jane Austen were studied extensively, while influential Indian literary figures such as Kalidasa and Kabir received comparatively less attention. English literary societies and intellectual networks. The book explores the role of English literary societies and intellectual networks in British India. These societies, such as the Asiatic Society of Bengal and the Madras Literary Society, provided platforms for the study and discussion of English literature. They also fostered a sense of intellectual community among Indian scholars and provided spaces for them to engage with English literary texts and ideas. Translations and adaptations. Viswanathan highlights the importance of translations and adaptations in the reception of English literature in British India. Indian scholars often translated English literary works into Indian languages, making them accessible to a wider audience. This facilitated the dissemination of English literature and its integration into Indian literary traditions. For instance, the translation of English works like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata into English by Indian scholars allowed for cross-cultural exchange and influenced the development of Indian English literature. English literature is a tool of self-fashioning. The study of English literature in British India offered opportunities for self-fashioning and the construction of individual and national identities. Indian scholars engaged with English literary texts to negotiate their place in the colonial order and express their own ideas and perspectives. For example, Indian intellectuals like Mulk Rajanand and R.K. Narayan used English literary techniques and themes in their writings to explore Indian social realities and challenge colonial stereotypes. Influence on education and literary institutions. The book explores how the study of English literature in British India influenced the structure and content of educational institutions. English literary study became a cornerstone of education in elite schools and colleges, shaping the curriculum and pedagogical practices. For instance, universities like the University of Calcutta and the University of Madras incorporated the study of English literature as a central component of their syllabi, exerting a lasting impact on the education system. These additional examples delve deeper into the intricacies of English literary study in British India, shedding light on aspects such as canon formation, translation, self-expression, and institutional influence. They highlight the agency and resilience of Indian scholars and intellectuals who navigated the colonial educational system to carve out spaces for their own literary and intellectual contributions. Influence of British literary criticism. Viswanathan explores how British literary criticism and theories shaped the study of English literature in British India. The works of critics such as Matthew Arnold, T.S. Eliot, and F.R. Leavis were introduced and taught in Indian educational institutions. This led to the adoption of Western critical perspectives and methodologies, influencing the interpretation and analysis of English literary texts by Indian scholars. Impact on gender and women's writing. The study of English literature in British India had implications for gender dynamics and women's writing. English literary study provided a platform for women writers to engage with literary texts and express their own perspectives. Writers such as Rokia Sakawat Hossain and Kamala Das used their knowledge of English literature to challenge gender norms and advocate for women's rights. Influence on literary production. Viswanathan discusses how the study of English literature influenced literary production in British India. Indian writers and poets drew inspiration from English literary traditions and incorporated Western literary techniques into their own works. For example, the poet Rabindranath Tagore, influenced by English Romantic poetry, developed his own unique style that blended Indian and Western literary elements. Colonial educational institutions. The book examines the establishment and functioning of colonial educational institutions in British India. These institutions, such as universities and colleges, were key sites for the study of English literature. Examples include Presidency College in Calcutta and the University of Bombay, which played significant roles in promoting English literary study and shaping the intellectual landscape of the time. Literary journals and publications. Viswanathan discusses the role of literary journals and publications in facilitating the study and dissemination of English literature in British India. Journals like the Calcutta Review and the Indian Antiquary provided platforms for scholarly articles, book reviews, and critical discussions on English literary texts. They also served as avenues for Indian writers to showcase their own creative works. Post-colonial perspectives. The book reflects on the post-colonial legacy of English literary study in India. Viswanathan examines how the study of English literature continues to be a significant part of the Indian educational system and the ongoing debates surrounding its relevance and position in a post-colonial context. She explores how Indian scholars have engaged with post-colonial theories and criticism to challenge and expand upon the colonial legacy of English literary study. These additional examples offer further insights into the impact of English literary study in British India, including its influence on literary production, gender dynamics, educational institutions, and the post-colonial perspectives that have emerged in response to this history. They highlight the multifaceted nature of the subject and its continuing relevance in contemporary literary and academic discourse. Literary societies and debates. Viswanathan explores the role of literary societies and debates in shaping the study of English literature in British India. These societies, such as the Bengal Literary Society and the Bombay Literary Society, provided platforms for scholars, writers, and intellectuals to discuss and exchange ideas about English literature. They organized lectures, readings, and discussions on various literary topics, contributing to the intellectual and cultural landscape of the time. English literary texts as tools of resistance. Viswanathan highlights instances where Indian scholars and writers strategically used English literary texts as tools of resistance against colonial domination. They drew upon the ideas and themes found in English literature to challenge oppressive structures and advocate for social and political change. For example, the novel, Anandamath, by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay served as a rallying cry for the Indian independence movement, incorporating elements of English literature to inspire nationalist sentiments. English literary education and social mobility. The study of English literature in British India provided avenues for social mobility and upward mobility for certain sections of Indian society. Proficiency in English language and literature opened doors to employment opportunities in the colonial administration, law, journalism, and education. For example, Indian individuals who acquired English literary education were able to secure positions as interpreters, clerks, and teachers in colonial institutions, which offered improved social and economic prospects. Influence on language and linguistic shifts. Viswanathan examines how the study of English literature in British India influenced language dynamics and linguistic shifts. English literary education played a role in the spread and adoption of the English language among Indian communities, leading to linguistic shifts and the emergence of new varieties such as Indian English. This had implications for language politics and identity formation in post-colonial India. Intersections with Indian social and political movements. The book explores how the study of English literature intersected with various social and political movements in British India. Indian intellectuals who engaged with English literary texts often connected their literary analyses with broader social and political issues. For instance, the works of Indian writers and critics like Desrosiers and Gandhi reflected a deep engagement with English literature while also addressing concerns related to nationalism, social reform, and anti-colonial struggles. Legacies and contemporary relevance. Viswanathan reflects on the legacies of English literary study in British India and its contemporary relevance. The book examines how the study of English literature continues to be an integral part of literary and cultural education in India today, and the ongoing debates surrounding its place within a post-colonial and multicultural context. These additional examples further highlight the diverse aspects of English literary study in British India, including its role in literary societies, resistance movements, social mobility, language dynamics, and its connections to broader social and political contexts. They emphasize the complex and nuanced nature of English literary education and its enduring impact on Indian society and culture.